Hello students, welcome back to our final episode from chapter 3. We are looking at double shifts in supply and demand. We saw a couple examples in the previous episode, so now we'll just finish off the last ones. So let's say that wheat gets more expensive. Simultaneously, people decide to go gluten-free. How will that affect the bread market? So wheat is an ingredient in making bread. Bread also involves gluten, so if people are trying to avoid gluten, they're also avoiding bread. So go ahead and do your analysis and pause the video until you have completed it. Alright, let's go over what's happening in this situation. So you gotta figure out which curve shifts. So wheat is an input, an ingredient in making bread. Input costs, we said, shift supply. If people are starting to prefer gluten-free or low-gluten diets, that's a change in their tastes. So consumer tastes, we know, shift demand. So you have one demand shift, and we also have a supply shift going on at the same time. So let's go look at the implications of that. The first thing we'll do is study the demand shift. So consumer tastes are changing, and now they're buying less bread because they're trying to avoid the gluten that is in bread. So demand starts out over here at D0, and here's our supply curve S. The old equilibrium is where old demand is beating supply. That happens right over here, P0, Q0. The new equilibrium is where a new demand curve back here meets supply. That's P1, Q1. So you can see that prices have fallen. P1 is below P0. Q1 is also below Q1, so quantity falls as well. So P goes down, Q also goes down. We put two down arrows in our table. So now we go on to fill in the second part of the table. We look at the other part of the story, which is the increase in the cost of wheat. So because wheat got more expensive, it's now more expensive for firms to make bread. Some loaves of bread that have been barely profitable in the past now become unprofitable due to increased costs. As a result, firms are going to cut back on how much bread they're making. That's going to reduce supply, so supply is going to shift back. Here's old supply, S0. That meets demand over here. Here's demand at this point, P0, Q0. New supply is going to be over here. That meets demand at this point, P1, Q1. That means that prices are going up, and it means that quantity is going down. So you give an up arrow to price in our table, and I give a down arrow to quantity. That wraps up the section on the individual shifts. Now you got to combine them. So for price, we have a down arrow, prices going down, but we also have prices going up. We don't know which one's bigger. If the shift's go in opposite directions, there is ambiguity. So we just got to put a question mark here for the overall effect. For quantity, though, we do know what's going on. Quantity went down with the first shift. The second shift also caused quantity to go down. That must mean that quantity overall has to be decreasing. So we can give that one another down arrow. We have two possible cases. Price could rise or price could fall. Let's draw a graph for each one. So We start out on old supply, that's S0, this blue line over here. And we also have old demand, that's D0, this top black curve here. So D0 and S0 meet at this point, so that's the old equilibrium. This is the old price P0 and the old quantity Q0. Now the new equilibrium is where the new supply curve, that's out here in gold, intersects with new demand. There's new demand. So those two curves meet right over here, P1, Q1. So the way I've drawn it, price has fallen overall. Quantity dropped overall, but quantity had to fall overall. We said quantity was unambiguously declining in our table earlier. So in this case, we had a big demand shift, and that dragged prices down. The supply shift caused prices to go up, but the supply shift was smaller, and overall demand dominated. That's why prices declined overall in this picture. So that's one possibility. We said prices could rise or they could fall. So now let's show the possibility where prices rise instead. So here I've got a small demand shift and a really big supply shift. We start out at old supply. Here's old supply. And old demand. Old demand's up here. Old supply, old demand brings us to this point. P0, Q0. That's our starting point. New supply, that's up over here, S1. New demand, that's down here, D1. They cross over at this point. We label that P1, Q1. So as you can see, P1 is above P0, so prices rose in this case. Q1 is below Q0, so quantity fell. So we have one case where prices rise overall, and we have the other case where prices fall overall because the effect on price was unclear. One shift took us one way, the other shift took us the other way. We don't know which one's bigger. That's why there were two possibilities. Now with quantity declined in both graphs because both shifts dragged quantity down. So that's why you saw Q go down over here, and you also saw Q go down over there. So that's how you analyze double shifts. So what you basically do is you look at each shift individually first. Then you ask yourself, the shifts go in the same direction or they go in opposite directions? When they go in the same direction, you know what happens. When they go in opposite directions, it's unclear. So that wraps up chapter 3, which is a hugely important chapter. So be sure to tune in for our next episode, which you go on and learn some more stuff about microeconomics. In the meantime, stay safe and stay healthy.